إن شاء الله خلال هذه المحاضرة سوف أقوم بتغطية مجموعة من المفاهيم المتعلقة بلغة البرمجة الجافا، والتي تتعلق بمساق Principles of Object Oriented Programming، تحديدا التي قمنا بمناقشتها خلال الأسبوعين الأولين من الفصل الحالي. استكمالا لما توقفنا عنده من شرح حول لغة الجافا وما يميز لغة الجافا عن غيرها من لغات البرمجة، أهم الخصائص التي تتمتع بها هذه اللغة. كنا قد توقفنا عند مفهوم .java و .class file names and file extensions. So every source code must be typed in a file name in any Java application, and that file name will have a file name as well as a file extension. The file extension is .java file, and each .java file will be compiled into a .class file. So what does that mean? We have two different file extensions for the same file name. So to better clarify what we mean by these concepts, let's create a Java application using the Apache NetBeans IDE. So to create a new application in Java, in NetBeans specifically, we go to File, New Project, and then we select Java application. There are some other alternatives or other project types, but we will stick for now with Java application. So after clicking next, we can specify the name of the project, and you can choose any name of the project as long as the naming style and naming convention adheres to the naming rules for any class name or variable name in Java or other programming languages. For example, you can call this Java application as, for example, OOP introduction. There are some other parameters here. We will come to these parameters later during next lectures, inshallah. So we click on finish, and then we can see that we have our project, which is called OOP introduction, and inside this project we have different folders. One of the most important folders that we will stick to during this lecture is the source packages folder. As we can see in the source packages folder, now we have one default package. It's called com.maree.oop introduction. So this default package now contains no classes. So let us start creating a few number of classes, starting with the main program class. Now I call it as a main program class, but you can call it any name as you wish. So again, by right clicking on this package name, you can see we have different options. Among those options we have the new option, and from that we can go to Java main class. There are two different options here, the Java class and Java main class, but we will create for the first time the Java main class. So we call the main class, for example, main program, and then click finish. So as we can see, this is an example of a source code in Java, and the file name is main program. The file extension is .java. So we have this class, it's called main program. It has one main method, and as we have discussed earlier, at least we need to have one class in our application with the main method. The reason behind this is because once we run the program, the Java virtual machine needs to identify which among the classes here in this package, or maybe in other packages within the same application, which among those classes contains the main method and from where it should start executing the program. So to better clarify this, let's create another class. Let's call this class as, for example, student. As we can see here, we have a student class, and this class contains no attributes and methods for now. We will create those very soon. So now we have two different class names, main program and student, and we have for both class names we have the same file extension, which is .java. If we click here on run project now, we will see that Java virtual machine tries to identify which class is our main class that contains the main method from where it will start execution. So we select this main class, and then we can see this message, which means that everything is correct. We have no syntax errors, and everything is okay with this program. So again, as we can see, we have two different classes, and both the classes belong to the same package, which is called again OOP introduction. Now if we want to see the .class file extension for both class names, we need to go to the folder where this application is created. So we go to right click on the project name, we go to properties, from properties we go to sources. This is the project folder. If we select this a project folder path, then we go to, for example, my computer, just type the path name, then or the path the complete path. Okay, so we can see two different folders, source and target. The source folder, if we move to the project folder which is called OOP introduction, we will see two different classes again. Main program.java, this is the first class which contains the main method, and we have student.java, which is our second class in this application. Now if we go back to the source, we will see that we have again to the application name, we will see that we have two different folders, the source and also the target. Inside the target we will see the classes, and inside the classes we will see again two different classes with .class file extensions. Okay, so we have source code which is typed into .java file here, main program and also student, and we have code which is compiled to produce .class file for each class that we defined. So as we can see again, we have two different classes with .class files. Okay, and again one .class file must contain a method called main method, which again accepts an array of string, and the Java virtual machine will call to start the program running. Okay, we'll call the main method to start running the application or program. Okay, so the Java application or the Java program contains several elements. We will discuss these elements in the next few slides, and then we will discuss the logic in Java programs, how to write selection statements, repetition statements. Most of the students, when they start studying Java, as we know, they also study computer programming fundamentals, which is C++ at the university. So I will not spend a lot of time here. Then I will move directly to the keyboard input and screen output. and start identifying or start creating and defining methods, classes, as well as objects that belong to those classes and in our application. And then we will compile the application and see the results. So in the source code, if we see any source code for any Java class, we will see different components. Among those components, we will see the symbols, including comment symbols, and there are different styles for comments. Each of these comment styles has a different purpose. We will come to that later during the course. And we have identifiers. For example, we have a reserved keyword which is called the class, which identifies that we have any class name here that belongs to this reserved keyword, which means we have a class named, and you can name it anything, like as we did with the main program class and also with the student class. Also, we have the main method. Again, the main method contains several types of keywords like public, static, void, main, and so on. We will explain each of these keywords during this lecture, inshallah. And we also have braces and semicolons. Braces to declare that this is the beginning of our, maybe it could be the beginning of our class, or maybe beginning of our method, or even segment of code, like beginning of a for loop block or repetition block in general. And the semicolon, which is always used to terminate other statements. So the structure of any Java program is typically composed of collection of one or more classes, and again each class contains one or maybe more methods, and we must have one class that contains the main method. Okay, so again, as we have mentioned earlier, we have the public, we have the static, and we have the void. These are reserved keywords in Java, and what those keywords mean is the following. First, the public. Public means that this item can be accessed from outside the class. Now, what do we mean by an item? An item could be a method like this one, or it could be an attribute that belongs to the class, or maybe a set of other classes that belong to another class. For example, if the class student contains, let's say, another classes like an address or so on, so we can declare the address class to be public or not. We will see what are the other options that we can define here in this context. So again, we have the keyword static, which means we have one element per class and not per object. We will see this in action very soon. And also we have the keyword void, which means this method returns no value. Okay, so let's start with the static method to demonstrate what do we mean by this reserved keyword. So in the student class, let's create a method, and the method will be named, for example, get student details. So to create a method in Java, we have to create first its signature, or define its signature, and the signature of a method is composed of several elements. First, we need to identify the access modifier. And what do we mean by an access modifier in this context is which among which methods among this class, or maybe which objects among other classes in the same package or in other packages, are allowed to access this method. So in our context now, I will define the access modifier for the getStudentDetails to be public. Then another part of the signature is the return data type for that method, which means is it going to return some data, and if it is going to return some data, what is the type for that data, or it is going to return no value, which means void. So in our context, since we will call the method get student details, then clearly we are going to retrieve some string, some details about the student in a string data type or string format. So the return data type is a string, and then the third part of the method signature is its name, get student details. Okay, so we have public string get student details, and the last part of the method signature is the arguments, okay, that this method takes. So in our case, this method will take no arguments, but it will return the student details. For the sake of simplicity, for in this example, I will just return default details, this string. Now, if let's say if we go to the main program class and try to access this method, which is again we have defined this method, get student details. We will see that we have a number of errors here. First, this method is not defined in this class. It is defined in the student class. So how can we access a method in a class that is defined in another class? So getStudentDetails in our context is not defined here in the main program class. It is defined in the student class, right? It is defined here. So one way to access this method from outside the class, which is called student, is to use the class name student dot. If we use the class name and then we use the dot operator, then what will happen is if the method was defined as a static, it will allow me to access the method that is defined within this class. So if that's if it is defined as a static. So if the method getStudentDetails is defined as a static, now we can go back to the main program and see that there is no error, and the method is called directly after using the class name and the dot operator. Let's see what is going to happen in this context if we right click and run this file. As we can see, nothing printed here as part of the output window, and the reason is because the method getStudentDetails in fact returns a string, but we didn't print it out yet. So to print this string out, we will use the system.out.println method, which means we need to print something on the screen. So what we are going to print now is the student.getStudentDetails. Okay, run, and now we will see that we have this output, which is default details. Sorry for this spelling mistake. So we have student details. Okay, details. Okay, if we delete the static again, static keyword, what is going to happen here? There is nothing wrong if we delete it from the student class, but again we cannot access it from the main program class. As we see now, we have this error, and we see that non-static method, which is getStudentDetails, cannot be referenced from a static context, which is here the static context. And also, since this method is called from outside the class, which is defined in the getStudentDetails is defined in the student class, so we cannot access it directly. Again, if I remove this, we cannot access it directly. Or maybe if you try to access it from the class here, you will not be able to access it outside the method, the main method. Okay, so let's delete this statement now. As we said, we have arguments as part of the main method signature. And in this case, the arguments are in the form of an array of strings. Okay. The reason for this array of strings is to allow user to pass some values to the program at execution time. So let's pass some arguments to this main method. And to do that, here in this application, we right click on the project name, click on properties, we go to arguments, and to run, and from run we go to arguments. Let's say we are going to specify this value as our argument and want to print it out on the output window. Okay, so how can we do that? Is simply use a system.out.println statement. The argument that we pass is, and now we are passing arguments of 0, which means this is the first element in our arguments array. Okay, so the plus sign should be here. Now if we run this program, we will see that the argument that we passed is 4. Okay, we can also pass more arguments if we wish at different indexes for this array of string through following the same steps. We go to properties, to run. For example, here I specified 3 different arguments. Then if we want to print their values out, we just use the same print statement and then pass the other arguments at indexes 1 and also at index 2. Okay, if we run now, we see that we have 3 different arguments. Okay, so now we will continue our discussion, and I have moved directly to this slide because we have covered all of these topics during the first 2 weeks, like for example how to deal with for example literal values, what are the different data types in Java, how can we assign values to variables and the string variable. We have applied some mathematical operators and compounds. We have used compounds, and also we have discussed a little bit about casting, the logical statements, the repetition structure. All of that we have discussed during the first 2 weeks. And again, now we want to obtain some input from the user. So what do we mean by that? In our application here, again we have this student class. Assume that the student has attributes, and among those attributes is the student's name. So we have private string name. Now in the main program class, we want to allow the user to pass the student's name from the keyboard. How can we do that? First, we need to define a set name or a setter method. We will call it set name. Okay, so this method, it has a public access modifier. It will not return anything, so it returns nothing, so it is a void. Okay, uh, the name of the method is set name. We pass the variable n as part of the arguments for this method. So we will use this dot name equals n. So this means that we are referring to this attribute that belongs to the class, assuming that we have passed the same variable name as part of the method signature. So we need to distinguish between these two variable names. So we have used this operator. Okay, so again, as we see, this is a reserved keyword in Java, and by using it we can distinguish between the variable name that is defined as an attribute of the class and the variable name that we pass as part of the arguments to the method. So in the main program class, we now want to allow the user to pass the student's name from the keyboard. How can we do that? We define the scanner class. We define an object of this class and use the system.n. So this means that we are going to obtain some input from the user from the keyboard. So before running this code, we can see that we have first an error which says that this scanner class is not defined. Okay, so we need to import the package that contains the scanner class, which is called java.util. So now we want to access the method in the student. So again, the method was not declared to be static here. Okay, so what do we do in this case? To access this method, we need to create an object of the class student. So we create an object student. Let's call student1 equals new student. Okay, so now student1 dot set name, we can access the method. So the value of the variable name will be obtained from the user after typing the name using the keyboard. So we will define a string variable called name, and name will equal to the object scan dot. Now we have different methods that belong to this scanner class, and we will use the next line. Next line means that we obtain the whole line that the user typed in using the keyboard. Let's see. So now, when running the file, it will ask me to enter the name of the student. So it's the application is waiting for me to input the name of the student. Let's write, for example, Muhammad. So now, to make things clear, we will prompt the user to input the name by using the system.out, please. enter the name. Okay, so name equals scan.nextLine, and here we want to print out the name of the student, so system.out println student1 dot. By the way, we didn't define a method to print out the student name or to get the student name. So let's define it first and then call this method again. So in the student class, we have to create a get name method. The difference is that the get name will return a string. The method will take nothing, no arguments, but it will return this dot name, which means the student's name. Okay, now student1 dot get name, we can see that this method is defined. So we can print out some text also. Student name is plus student.getName. Let's run the file and see. So please enter the name here. So student's name is Muhammad Mari. Okay. We can also define another variable for the student class, which is, for example, the GPA for the student. Again, this variable or attribute needs to have its setter and getter methods. Sometimes they are called accessor and mutator methods. Let's define them for the GPA attribute. So we have, instead of set name, we have set GPA, and we will pass GPA and get GPA. So this dot GPA equals GPA and return this dot GPA. Okay. There is an error here which says that we have incompatible types, and the reason because we are passing a variable of data type string, so we cannot assign to a double variable a string value. So GPA must be of type double. Again, here is the same another error, which is incompatible types. We asked this method to return string, however, we are returning double, so it will return double value. So now, in the main program, we can use the same steps to enter the GPA for the student from the keyboard and print it out on the screen. So students, please enter the GPA, but now we need to define a variable of type double. Let's call it GPA, and GPA will equal scan dot next double. Okay, then student1 dot set GPA, and we will pass the GPA. So student's GPA is student1 dot get GPA. Let's run the file again. So please enter the name. Please enter the GPA. So we are able now to allow the user to input some variable values from the keyboard. Like, for example, the user was able to enter the student's name from the keyboard, and he also was able to enter the student's GPA from the keyboard. Okay,